She had just finished a long day at work, exhausted but looking forward to a quiet evening at home. The sky was beginning to darken, painting the streets with soft shades of orange and gray as the sun sank lower. Traffic was light, and for a moment she felt a small sense of relief. Her favorite playlist was softly playing through the car speakers, filling the vehicle with familiar rhythms that always seemed to calm her. She drove slowly, taking in the sights of the neighborhood she had lived in for years. Everything felt normal, peaceful even. Then, without any warning, flashing blue and red lights appeared in her rearview mirror. She blinked, startled, and instinctively pulled her car over to the side of the road. Her heart started racing, a flutter that quickly turned into a sharp, panicked beat. She wasn't speeding. She hadn't run any stop signs. She couldn't understand why the lights were behind her. As she reached for her wallet and registration, she reminded herself to stay calm. She had always been told that cooperating with the police was the safest thing to do. 2 officers stepped out of their vehicle. One of them moved toward her driver's side window with a heavy, rigid stride. The other stayed near their car, hand resting on his belt. As they approached, her stomach sank. There was something about the way they looked at her, a coldness that made her uneasy. The first officer's face was hard, his eyes sharp and calculating, and she immediately felt the weight of judgment in that gaze. She tried to smile politely, hoping it would ease the tension. "Good evening, ma'am," the first officer said, his voice flat and formal. "Do you know why we pulled you over?" She shook her head gently. "No, officer. I'm not sure. Was I speeding?" The officer didn't answer immediately. He just stared at her for a long moment, and then another officer moved closer. The air between them felt heavy, charged. She noticed the second officer's hand hovering near his belt, but she didn't want to assume anything. She tried to keep her voice calm, steady. "Is there a problem, officers? Did I do something wrong?" Then suddenly the first officer's hand went to his holster. He pulled his gun out and pointed it at her, and the world seemed to stop. The playlist in her car became background noise she barely noticed. The music didn't matter anymore. The only thing that mattered was the cold, frightening metal aimed directly at her. Her hands instinctively shot up in the air, trembling. "Step out of the vehicle now," the officer barked. Fear gripped her like a vice. Her mind raced, thinking of every story she had ever heard, every news report about people in similar situations. She knew that the wrong move, even an accidental one, could change her life forever. She wanted to move slowly, to show she was not a threat. Okay. "I'm stepping out," she said, her voice quivering but trying to remain calm. Her heart was pounding so hard she felt like it might burst from her chest. As she slowly opened the car door, she kept her hands in the air, careful not to make any sudden movements. The officer's eyes were sharp, but there was something else too, a look of irritation, impatience even. He didn't seem concerned about her safety, only about control. She could feel the stares of people passing by, some slowing down to look, some filming with their phones. She didn't know anyone around, but the presence of witnesses made her slightly less afraid. The officer moved closer, shouting orders that she barely registered. She was trembling so badly that she could hardly hold her registration. Her lips were dry and her thoughts were scattered. Why were they treating her this way? She had never been in trouble before. She had always been careful, always respectful. Nothing about her actions should have brought this danger to her doorstep. "Hands where I can see them," one officer shouted. I know, she stammered. She moved her hands higher, making sure every movement was slow and deliberate. Her body was shaking, but her mind tried to remain logical. She thought about how to respond, what words to say, anything to de-escalate this terrifying situation. She reminded herself to breathe, to stay calm even though fear was flooding through her veins. The second officer moved around, keeping a tight watch, his eyes never leaving her. She noticed that he kept glancing at her vehicle, as if searching for some hidden justification for their behavior. It didn't make sense. She hadn't done anything wrong. Her hands remained visible, and yet the gun stayed pointed at her. The air was thick with tension, and the seconds felt like hours. She tried speaking again, her voice slightly stronger this time, though still cautious. "Can you please tell me why this is happening? I'm not resisting. I just want to understand." The first officer said nothing. His silence was heavier than any words. The other officer muttered something under his breath which she couldn't quite hear, but it didn't sound friendly. The situation was surreal. She felt trapped, exposed, and vulnerable. The presence of the gun made every instinct scream at her to flee, but she knew that moving could be disastrous. She stayed put. her entire body coiled with tension, trying to show that she was no threat. Time stretched on, each moment filled with anxiety. Her mind raced through every possible scenario, every possible outcome. She thought of her family, the people who would be waiting for her at home. She thought of the countless stories of people who hadn't survived similar encounters. It was terrifying to realize that something as simple as being in the wrong place at the wrong time could have turned her life upside down, or ended it completely. She looked around, trying to catch the eyes of any witnesses. A few people had stopped, phones raised, recording. That gave her a small measure of comfort. She wasn't alone in this moment. The world could see what was happening, and maybe, just maybe, that would make a difference. She reminded herself to breathe, to stay calm, and to follow every instruction to the letter. Every small step mattered now. Suddenly, the first officer took a step closer. The gun never wavered. She could feel the danger radiating from him. "Move closer to the car," he demanded. Her hands stayed high as she carefully stepped forward, each motion deliberate. Her pulse pounded in her ears. She had no idea what would happen next, and every fiber of her being screamed at her to stay safe. The second officer circled around, keeping a tight grip on his baton while his eyes never left her. She noticed how tense his posture was, how every movement was calculated. It became clear to her that this was not just routine. This was something different, something personal. She didn't know what she had done to provoke it, but it was clear she was in danger. Her mind flashed to all the things she had learned about dealing with law enforcement. Stay calm, stay respectful, follow instructions, never argue, never make sudden movements. She tried to make herself as small as possible, to seem non-threatening. Her body shook, but her hands stayed visible. Her voice remained steady, even though her heart was racing uncontrollably. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong," she said quietly. "I'm just trying to go home safely." The first officer finally spoke, but it wasn't comforting. "Step out of the vehicle and keep your hands where I can see them," he said sharply. "No," she complied immediately, stepping out with trembling legs. She raised her hands as high as she could, careful to show that she posed no threat. The fear in her chest was overwhelming, but she focused on one thing at a time.
Stay alive, stay calm.
Follow instructions. Everything else could wait. As she stood there, exposed and frightened, she realized something crucial. She was in a situation where her life could literally be in the hands of people who had already decided she was dangerous. Regardless of the truth, every second counted. Every decision mattered. The realization was terrifying. But it also ignited something inside her, a determination to survive, to stay calm, to not give them any reason to escalate further. The officers continued to shout commands, their voices sharp and unyielding. She answered each one, careful to follow exactly. Sweat ran down her back. Her heart pounded, and every instinct screamed at her to move away. But she knew that now. Stillness and compliance were her only protection. She could only hope that the situation would end without tragedy. In those moments, time seemed to stretch. She thought of everyone she loved, everyone who depended on her. She thought of the life she had worked so hard to build, the simple joy of returning home after a long day, and she realized that all of that in a single instant could be taken away. And yet, even in that terrifying moment, she stayed composed. She followed every instruction. She kept her hands visible. She spoke when necessary, but only to calm the situation. Her mind was racing, but her actions were controlled. She refused to give them any reason to escalate further. The tension hung thick in the air, the night silent except for the sounds of their voices and the distant hum of cars passing by. She stood there, a single person in the middle of a dangerous situation, aware that one wrong move could change everything. And even in the fear, she held onto a single thought. She would survive this, and she would not let fear control her. The moment the officers finally left, she felt her body collapse with relief and exhaustion. She sank into the driver's seat, trembling, her hands still shaking from the adrenaline. Her mind was spinning, replaying every second of the encounter. She kept thinking about the way the gun had been pointed at her. The sharpness in their eyes, the way they had spoken to her like she was dangerous for no reason at all. Every detail seemed unreal, yet she could feel it deep in her bones. It had happened and she had survived, but the fear didn't just go away. It lingered, gnawing at her from the inside. She knew she had to do something. She couldn't let this go unnoticed. Pulling out her phone, she quickly checked her messages and called a close friend who worked in government services, someone she trusted completely. Her voice shook as she explained what had happened, recounting the event in detail. She told everything: the flashing lights, the officer's aggressive approach, the commands, and most importantly, the gun pointed at her. Every word felt heavy, but she forced herself to speak, knowing that the truth needed to be heard. Her friend listened silently, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly letting her speak. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. Finally, her friend said, "You need to document this, everything. Every word, every movement, every detail. Do not leave anything out. And send me those videos." She quickly went through her phone and found the footage she had captured. The bystanders had recorded the whole encounter too, some from multiple angles. She forwarded the videos immediately. The friend's response was calm but urgent. "This is serious. I'll guide you, but you have to stay safe. Don't confront them directly. Let the proper channels handle this. People need to see this." The first step, she realized, was to ensure there was proof, undeniable proof of what had happened. She posted the video online, carefully choosing words that explained the situation without exaggeration or speculation. She wrote plainly, describing how she had been pulled over, how the officers had aimed their guns at her, and how terrified she had felt. The post went up, and almost immediately, notifications started pouring in. People were commenting, sharing, expressing outrage. The story was spreading faster than she could have imagined. News outlets began to notice. The video had gone viral within hours. Headlines popped up across social media and news websites, describing the incident, highlighting the shocking aggression of the officers, and noting the racial undertones that many viewers had commented on. She watched as the story gained traction, the mixture of fear and anger in the comments reflecting her own feelings. People were appalled that such an encounter could happen in a quiet neighborhood to someone who had done nothing wrong. Meanwhile, she stayed cautious. She knew that when incidents like these went public, reactions could be unpredictable. Some people could be supportive, but others might be angry or hostile. She stayed in her car for a while longer, trying to calm herself before driving home. Her hands were still shaking, but she reminded herself to focus on her breathing, to slow her pulse. She felt a strange combination of fear, anger, and determination. Fear for her safety, anger at the injustice she had experienced, and determination to make sure this didn't happen to anyone else. The friend she had called continued to guide her. "Document everything else," they said. "Write down every conversation, every message, every interaction with the police. This will be important if it escalates. And remember, stay calm. They will try to intimidate you, but you have to stay composed." She began keeping a detailed record. Every time she spoke with authorities, every time a reporter reached out, every detail of her own recollections, she wrote it down. Each note reminded her that she had survived, that she had acted carefully, and that she was taking steps to ensure accountability. Even though she was exhausted, she pushed herself to remain vigilant. The response from the community was overwhelming. People reached out with support, encouragement, and even offers of legal advice. Many shared their own experiences with similar situations, stories of fear and survival, of being treated unfairly by those in positions of power. She read each message carefully, drawing strength from the knowledge that she was not alone, that many people understood the terror she had felt. At the same time, the police department released a statement. It was vague, carefully worded, and did not acknowledge the seriousness of the officers' actions. They said the situation was under review, and they asked the public to wait for more information. The statement felt hollow, almost insulting, and it only strengthened her resolve. She knew that waiting passively would not bring justice. Action was necessary. She also realized that this incident had drawn attention beyond the local community. National organizations focused on civil rights and police accountability began contacting her, asking for statements and interviews. She gave what she could, careful not to exaggerate or misrepresent the facts. Her story was already powerful. She didn't need to add anything. Her voice, calm yet firm, became a key element in the growing awareness of the incident. Amid all this, she had to continue with her daily life, even though every simple task felt heavy. Returning home, making dinner, going through emails, everything was colored by the stress of what had happened. Sleep was difficult. Every siren, every flash of blue or red in the distance made her heart leap. She found herself replaying the encounter, thinking about how she had kept calm, how she had followed instructions, and how she had survived a situation that could have ended tragically. But through all the fear and stress, she felt a growing sense of empowerment. She realized that she had something most people in her situation did not: proof. Video footage, witnesses, a detailed record of the events, all of it provided undeniable evidence. She had turned fear into action, trauma into documentation, and she had refused to be silenced. Her friend continued to offer guidance. "This is bigger than just one incident," they said. "This is about holding people accountable, about making sure this doesn't happen again. But you have to be strategic. Don't let anger control your actions. Stay calm, stay factual, and use the connections you have." She listened carefully. Connections she had? She thought about her professional life, the people she knew through work and community projects. She realized that some of these connections were stronger than she had appreciated. People in positions of influence who could help ensure justice was served. But she also knew she had to be careful. Any misstep could be used against her, could put her in danger. Over the next few days, the story grew. Social media platforms were filled with discussions about the incident. People were sharing the video, dissecting the officer's actions, questioning how such behavior could occur in modern society. Influencers, activists, and journalists all picked up the story, analyzing it, debating it, and raising awareness. Each time she saw a new post, a new share, or a new article, she felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. She had wanted to expose injustice, but now the attention was massive, and the stakes were higher than ever. Her own life had shifted dramatically. Friends and family called constantly, checking in on her, offering support, and sometimes expressing anger on her behalf. She appreciated the concern, but she also knew she had to remain composed. She couldn't let fear or anger dictate her decisions. She needed to think clearly, to act strategically. The officers, in the meantime, were placed on administrative leave. Rumors swirled about internal investigations, disciplinary action, and possible termination. But the woman knew that the system often protected its own, and that real accountability required persistence. She was determined to see the process through, to make sure her voice and the truth could not be ignored or erased. Even in moments of exhaustion, she continued to communicate with her friend, sharing updates and discussing next steps. She thought about filing formal complaints, about engaging legal counsel, about reaching out to higher authorities. The situation was delicate, complex, and fraught with risk, but she was determined. She refused to let fear control her life again. One evening, as she sat in her living room, scrolling through the countless messages and news articles about the incident, she realized something. What had happened to her was terrifying, unfair, and deeply wrong. But it also had the power to create change. By standing firm, by documenting everything, by speaking up, she was not just fighting for herself. She was fighting for everyone who might face a similar situation. She felt a sense of resolve solidifying inside her. She would not be a passive victim. She would be a witness, a voice, and a catalyst for accountability. She knew the path ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, resistance, and perhaps threats, but she also knew that fear, no matter how intense, could not define her actions. Her courage, her clarity, and her commitment to justice would guide her next steps. And so, as the days passed, she continued to navigate the aftermath. Each phone call, each message, each article became part of a larger story, one that she was determined to see through to the end. The encounter with the officers had shaken her, yes, but it had also awakened a strength she hadn't fully realized she possessed. She had survived the terror, and now she would ensure that the truth would be seen, heard, and acted upon. The days after the incident had been overwhelming. Her phone never stopped buzzing with messages, calls, and notifications. Every time she looked at her screen, it felt like the world was holding its breath alongside her. The story had grown far beyond her expectations, capturing national attention, sparking outrage, and forcing people to ask difficult questions about policing, accountability, and racial bias. Still, even with all the attention, she felt a growing sense of urgency. She knew the officers' actions couldn't simply be left to the local department. Something more had to be done. She sat at her kitchen table one evening, her laptop open, scanning the latest articles and social media posts. The comments were a mix of outrage, support, and disbelief. People were sharing their own experiences, and advocacy groups were weighing in. Yet, despite the swelling attention, She realized that real power rested with authorities who could enforce consequences. The police department had issued statements, yes, but they were vague, protective of their own, and slow to act. She knew that if nothing more was done, the officers might face minimal punishment, or worse, they might continue to patrol the streets, threatening others just as she had been threatened. Her friend on the phone had been guiding her carefully through every step. "You have to escalate this," the friend had said. "The more senior the authority you reach, the less likely they are to ignore it. But you need to be precise, factual, and professional. Any hint of exaggeration can be used against you." She had thought about this advice for days, considering her options. Legal counsel was one route, yes, but there was also a network of people she knew professionally, who had ties to government services and even military offices. It was unconventional, and she had hesitated, worrying about whether it was appropriate. But the more she thought about the incident, the more she realized the stakes were too high to hesitate. This wasn't just about her. This was about preventing potential harm to others, about making sure the officers' actions didn't go unchecked. After some thought, she decided to make a call she had never imagined she would make in her life. She picked up her phone, took a deep breath, and dialed the number of a high-ranking official she had worked with on professional projects. This was someone in the Pentagon she had met through collaborative work on national initiatives. She hadn't anticipated needing this connection for something personal, but now it seemed like the only way to ensure justice. The call connected, and she spoke calmly, introducing herself and briefly explaining the situation. "I need your advice," she said. "This involves law enforcement misconduct, and I fear for my safety. I also have evidence, including video footage and witness statements. I believe this requires immediate attention." The official listened attentively, and she could hear the seriousness in his voice. There was no rush to judgment, no assumption about her motives, just a careful, measured listening that immediately put her slightly at ease. She described the encounter in detail, staying factual, recounting every command, every movement, every aspect of how the officers had aimed their guns at her and treated her aggressively. She emphasized the danger, the racial undertones, and the potential for future harm if the officers were allowed to continue their duties without accountability. After she finished, there was a pause. Then the official spoke. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. This is serious, and we will review it carefully. Can you send over all evidence and documentation? Videos, timestamps, anything you have recorded? We will coordinate with the appropriate authorities to ensure that this is addressed swiftly and fairly." Her heart pounded. She had been terrified to make the call, uncertain how it would be received, but now she felt a cautious sense of relief. She could see a path forward, one that might prevent further danger and ensure that the officers faced real consequences. "I will send everything immediately," she said, and then quickly began gathering all files, screenshots, and notes she had kept over the past few days. As she compiled the evidence, she reflected on the irony of the situation. She had always been careful, had followed rules, had lived a law-abiding life. Yet despite her caution, she had been threatened in a way that could have ended her life. Now she was using every tool at her disposal to fight back, to turn fear into action, and to hold those responsible accountable. Once she sent the evidence, she followed up with the official, ensuring that nothing was overlooked. She remained professional, providing clear explanations of every file and every piece of documentation. She described the context, the witnesses, the timeline, and the public reaction. Every detail mattered, and she wanted to ensure that the review would be thorough and decisive. Meanwhile, the public attention continued to grow. Social media was filled with reactions to the viral video, with commentators and advocates analyzing the situation, drawing comparisons to other incidents, and calling for systemic change. Her inbox was flooded with messages of support, legal advice, and invitations to speak about her experience. While she appreciated the encouragement, she remained focused on the task at hand, ensuring that the officers would face real consequences. She also felt a personal transformation taking place. The fear that had initially consumed her was still present, but it had been tempered by a sense of empowerment. She realized that by taking deliberate, thoughtful action, she could influence outcomes that seemed beyond her control. The encounter had shown her the fragility of safety and the importance of preparation, courage, and strategy. During the next few days, the Pentagon official coordinated with federal authorities and oversight offices. She was kept informed of the process, receiving updates on the investigation, the review of evidence, and the steps being taken to ensure accountability. The officers had been placed on administrative leave, but now it became clear that this investigation was serious and far-reaching. It was no longer a local issue. This was being treated at the national level, with attention from offices that had the power to enforce real consequences. Her professional connections proved invaluable. Colleagues who understood the importance of evidence management and procedural correctness advised her on how to handle communications, how to respond to inquiries, and how to remain composed under pressure. She followed every suggestion meticulously, knowing that each careful decision strengthened her position and increased the likelihood of meaningful outcomes. At the same time, she had to navigate her own emotions. The stress, the fear, and the anxiety were constant companions. Nights were difficult. Every sudden noise made her jump. Every knock at the door made her heart race. Yet she learned to manage it, to channel it into focus and preparation. Meditation, journaling, and long walks became her methods of coping. She had survived one of the most terrifying moments of her life, and now she was determined not to let lingering fear control her life. Community response continued to grow. Activists, journalists, and ordinary citizens shared her story widely, drawing attention to the systemic issues highlighted by the incident. Forums and social media platforms discussed not only the immediate danger she had faced, but also the broader implications of racial bias in law enforcement. She read the comments carefully, feeling a mix of pride and responsibility. Her story had become a voice for many who had not yet been able to speak, and that realization strengthened her resolve. As the investigation progressed, she was occasionally asked to provide additional statements, clarifications, and supplementary evidence. Each request was handled carefully, professionally, and with precision. She understood that every word, every document, every response could influence the outcome. She remained meticulous, ensuring that her presentation of the facts was accurate, complete, and compelling. Through it all, the officials she was working with in the Pentagon were professional, methodical, and decisive. They recognized the seriousness of the situation, the potential danger if the officers remained in the field, and the importance of acting swiftly. Their involvement elevated the process from a local review to a matter of national accountability. The weight of that realization was both daunting and reassuring. She began to notice subtle changes as a result of her actions. The local police department, under increasing scrutiny, became more cautious in its public statements and interactions. Community groups began organizing discussions and meetings about safety, bias, and accountability. The story had shifted from a personal trauma to a catalyst for broader dialogue and change. She felt the impact of her courage ripple outward, touching lives beyond her own. Despite the progress, she never lost sight of the danger she had faced. The memory of the gun, the officer's aggressive tone, the fear that had gripped her remained vivid. It was a reminder of why she had acted, why she had reached out to higher authorities, and why she had documented every moment with care. The experience had taught her the fragility of safety, the power of preparedness, and the necessity of courage in the face of injustice. Even as she navigated these complex emotional and procedural landscapes, she maintained her daily life as best she could. Work, home responsibilities, and personal relationships all required attention. Yet every step of the way, the encounter with the officers was present in her mind, a source of motivation, a reminder of her resilience, and a call to action. The call to the Pentagon had been a turning point. It had transformed fear into strategy, helplessness into agency. She had used her connections not for personal gain, but to ensure that justice would be served and that others would be protected. Her careful, deliberate actions had elevated the situation from a local incident to a matter of national accountability, demonstrating the power of courage, composure, and persistence. As days turned into weeks, the investigation continued to unfold. She remained vigilant, providing updates, responding to inquiries, and coordinating with authorities. Each step reinforced her sense of purpose. She had survived a terrifying moment, and now she was ensuring that no one else would have to face the same danger without consequence. In reflecting on all that had happened, she realized something profound. Fear had been her companion, but it had not defined her. Courage had been her choice, and action had been her tool. By combining composure, evidence, and strategic connections, she had taken control of a situation that had initially felt completely out of her hands. Her story, Once a personal nightmare had become a beacon of accountability, resilience, and hope. The investigation moved faster than she had expected. Once the Pentagon became involved, it was clear that this was no ordinary review. Federal authorities and oversight agencies were now engaged, reviewing the evidence she had submitted, analyzing the videos, and interviewing witnesses. She stayed closely informed, receiving updates at every step. The feeling was surreal. What had begun as a terrifying personal encounter had transformed into a process with the potential to hold powerful people accountable. Even with the attention and support, the days were tense. She continued to feel the lingering fear from the initial encounter. Every siren in the distance, every sudden knock at the door made her heart race. She had become hyper-aware of her surroundings, cautious about who was nearby and what was happening around her. The memory of the officers' guns, the sharpness of their commands, and the coldness in their eyes remained vivid. It had been a close brush with real danger, and the anxiety didn't simply vanish overnight. At the same time, the process gave her a sense of purpose. She began working closely with lawyers, advocacy groups, and investigators to ensure that every piece of evidence was properly documented and understood. She reviewed videos repeatedly, wrote detailed statements, and clarified timelines for investigators. Each step felt meticulous, but she understood its importance. Accuracy and clarity could not be compromised. The truth needed to be undeniable. The community around her also became more involved. Local groups organized meetings, discussing ways to support her and prevent similar incidents in the future. Social media continued to amplify the story, with videos and posts shared widely. People expressed anger, fear, and solidarity. Many who had once felt powerless in the face of injustice saw in her story a model for standing firm and seeking accountability. She read these messages carefully, drawing strength from the knowledge that her actions were resonating far beyond her own experience. The officers in question were officially placed on administrative leave, but the investigation did not stop there. Federal authorities began to examine past incidents involving the same officers. Reports of misconduct, complaints, and prior interactions with the public were reviewed. It became evident that this encounter was not an isolated case. Patterns of behavior emerged, suggesting that these officers had repeatedly overstepped boundaries and exhibited biased conduct. The revelations were shocking but crucial. They reinforced the importance of holding the officers accountable, not just for her experience, but for the safety of the entire community. She stayed in constant communication with the investigators, answering questions and providing any additional details they requested. Each interaction was handled carefully. She had learned that even small missteps could be exploited to dismiss or undermine her claims. Her voice, calm and precise, became a vital part of the process. She realized that her persistence and attention to detail were just as important as the evidence itself. The media also played a significant role. Journalists contacted her for interviews, asking for her account of the events, her thoughts on the officers' behavior, and her perspective on racial bias in law enforcement. She spoke openly but measuredly, emphasizing facts over emotion and ensuring that her message remained clear and focused. Her composure under pressure impressed many who followed the story, and it helped maintain public interest while preventing the narrative from being distorted. During this time, she noticed changes in the behavior of the police department. While initial statements had been vague and defensive, they now appeared more cautious and deliberate. They began to cooperate more openly with investigators, understanding that national attention and federal oversight left little room for evasion. Internal discussions about policy review and officer accountability began to circulate, reflecting the pressure brought by the investigation and public scrutiny. One afternoon, she received a call from an official at the Pentagon who had been closely overseeing her case. "We are moving to take decisive action," he said. "The evidence is clear, and the officer's conduct cannot be ignored. We are coordinating with federal and local authorities to ensure that appropriate consequences are enforced." She felt a surge of relief. After days of tension and uncertainty, it seemed that the weight of the investigation was finally producing results. She knew that the officers could not simply continue in their roles as if nothing had happened. Their actions had been documented, their behavior analyzed, and their accountability secured by law and oversight. The process of accountability was methodical and thorough. The officers were formally interviewed multiple times, confronted with the video evidence, witness statements, and records of prior complaints. Their responses were examined carefully and inconsistencies were noted. Federal authorities and oversight bodies coordinated with local police to ensure that disciplinary measures would be appropriate and legally binding. It was a meticulous process, designed to leave no room for doubt or manipulation. Throughout this time, she remained vigilant. While her fear had lessened somewhat, the memory of the encounter kept her cautious. She continued to avoid unnecessary risks, maintained situational awareness, and leaned on her support network for guidance and reassurance. Friends, family, and professional contacts offered encouragement, reminding her that she had taken the right steps and that her actions were making a difference. The community response continued to inspire her. Local meetings and forums focused on police accountability, safety, and systemic reform. People shared stories of their own experiences, many of which echoed her fears and frustrations. She realized that her voice had become a catalyst for broader discussion and action. By standing firm and documenting her experience, she had created a platform for awareness, advocacy, and change. As the investigation progressed, officials announced that the officers would face disciplinary action, including termination. The announcement was covered extensively in the media, highlighting the significance of federal oversight and the role of evidence in ensuring accountability. The public response was overwhelmingly supportive, with many praising her courage and composure. Her story had become more than a personal ordeal. It was now a powerful example of justice in action. She also noticed the personal impact of the experience. The trauma she had endured remained, but it had transformed into a source of strength. She had faced fear and danger, yet she had taken control of the situation in the best way possible. She had turned vulnerability into action, fear into documentation, and trauma into advocacy. Each step of the process reinforced her resilience and her ability to navigate complex challenges. In her interactions with investigators and officials, she maintained professionalism and clarity. She provided detailed statements, clarified timelines, and responded to follow-up questions with precision. Her thoroughness ensured that the investigation could proceed without doubt or delay. The evidence she had compiled, the videos, witness statements, and personal notes was now a central part of the case, providing an unassailable record of what had occurred. During this period, she also reflected on the broader implications of her experience. She realized that the incident had highlighted systemic issues in law enforcement, including the importance of oversight, accountability, and community engagement. By documenting her encounter and seeking higher-level intervention, she had not only protected herself but also contributed to the wider conversation about safety, fairness, and justice. At home, she continued to manage the stress and anxiety that lingered from the encounter. She practiced mindfulness, exercised, and leaned on her support network to maintain emotional balance. She understood that while the investigation was crucial, taking care of her own well-being was equally important. Her resilience was built not only on strategic action, but also on maintaining her physical and emotional health. The officer's termination and the findings of the investigation were covered in national news. Reports emphasized the role of evidence, witness testimony, and federal oversight in ensuring accountability. Analysts discussed the significance of the case for broader reform, noting that it demonstrated the power of individual courage and meticulous documentation. The story was widely shared, with many praising